Welcome! In this video we're going to be taking a quick look at Michelle, the epic grade DPS class Elune. Going over her base stats, at level 60 she has a decent 22.9 HP, some nice attack at 5.4k, and her PDEF and MDEF are typically low for an epic grade at 2.5k each. Her attack speed does put her about on the mid-range of the speeds, and she does have an increased crit stat, making it a little bit easier to build her for crit. As she's transcended up to the max, her HP does go up to an okay 34k, with her attack being at a pretty nice 8.1k for an epic grade, meaning that she does do pretty good damage, even as an epic. Moving on to her skills, her first skill is Snipe. This skill is used also in coordination with her passive, so make sure that if you do level it, make sure you do level it up all the way, as it is a useful skill. This one does basic physical damage to a frontline only target. Once it's leveled up to level 6, the damage does go up to a pretty decent amount of physical damage, so it is a pretty decent skill and you will be using it usually pretty often. Her special skill, Savage Assault. Again, this skill is also pretty important to level up, as it is used in coordination with her passives too, so you'll want to have this one leveled up as well to make sure that you get the maximum damage output that you can from her. This skill is a single target attack done to any enemy on the field, front or back row, and it does pretty good physical damage. This also applies a physical effect that does a bleeding effect for 3 turns. The damage itself is quite nice and does go up to a pretty nice 1600 plus 241k of her attack as physical damage, and does a 4-turn bleeding once maxed out, which is pretty good for it, and it's a good single target attack. Her ultimate skill is an AoE attack, again physical damage based on her attack. This skill is pretty good for PvE situations, but less effective in PvP. For the buff portion of it, it does basic physical damage with a decent amount of multiplier at 198%. The bonus buff that it gets, though, is you get a 3-turn enhanced buff that increases attack by 10% at lower levels, 20% at max level for each enemy that is defeated. So in PvE, you have a good chance of killing enemies with this, which means you're going to get a nice attack buff. But in PvP, you have less chance of killing anything with this unless their HP is pretty low, and otherwise don't rely on this attack buff to boost your stats up to do more damage. On her first passive, she gains accuracy rate increases by 10%, and her damage increases by 1% for every 1% of a target's evasion rate. This makes her as a good counter to evasion tanks such as Mei or Baekwonjo, as they typically will have increased evasion. So by using her, you have a very high chance of landing those attacks and not having to worry about any type of evasion problems that they're going to have, because your accuracy rate goes up by a lot more than what they get for their evasion, so you'll have very high accuracy, meaning that you should be landing all of your attacks and debuffs except where tolerance stacks are concerned. Her second passive, this is the one that works in coordination with her skills. What this does is, if you attack with Snipe, which is her normal skill, or Arrow Rain, her ultimate skill, and you attack and it lands as a crit, then it automatically uses her special skill without consuming any soul against the same target you attacked. However, if you do use the ultimate skill, the Arrow Rain, and it's an AoE, and one of the attacks crits, it doesn't matter which one on who, then it will randomly attack a enemy and not the one you specifically targeted or the one that got the crit necessarily. It will attack just a random enemy, so keep that in mind. So if you land a crit, it'll still land, which is still pretty good because you still have that extra damage. It's essentially just an extra way to get damage. So by using her normal skill on a target and you crit, like with Snipe, then it's essentially 2 hits. And the special skill does apply a bleeding effect, which is pretty nice. Now her passive 3, this one what it does is, if you attack an enemy that has the bleeding from her special skill, Savage Assault, then it increases the damage that you do by 20% and the attack does not miss. but they need to have that bleeding effect caused by the Savage Assault for the attack not to miss and the damage increase to apply. This means that if you are attacking frontline tanks or something or whatever, then you can be landing those additional that additional damage and not have to worry about missing. Now, she doesn't attack and she still will miss on things like Reaper, because the Reaper evasion is done through a passive effect, which is essentially a soul effect, allowing her to evade the damage anyway. So using Michelle to counter Reaper isn't effective, since her accuracy does not matter, because the evasion through the Reaper is not done through a stat, it is actually done through a passive skill. So make sure you keep that in mind if you plan on using Michelle or trying to use Michelle against Reaper. It's still not going to be effective. She's mainly good for other type evasion units that are not evading through passives and they're just evading through other means. For builds with her, things that you'd want to do, let's go ahead and go over the skill gem sets first. The skill gems for the normal skill is a 5% chance to stun with a red, red, orange. This does make the skill somewhat useful, so go ahead. I would recommend going ahead and putting this on there, as then the skill does something more than just nothing other than physical damage. This way you at least have a chance to stun when you do it. On the special skill, the recommended gems are red, red, orange again. This one has a 5% chance of reducing the target's physical defense by 10% for 2 turns. This is a pretty low chance and a pretty insignificant thing. So you would probably rather just have something else on this to give more damage or whatever. So you can go with additional red, you can go with additional orange. This skill, if it crits, it doesn't matter because the passive doesn't trigger and do this skill again if this one crits. So going orange, orange, orange on this one really won't make a difference. So going with just more damage might be better, since this is the skill that gets triggered. Going with the recommended red, red, orange isn't bad, as it does give you higher physical damage plus the crit rate, but if you want to ensure higher crits, you can still go with the full orange. As far as your ultimate skill goes, this is a red, red, violent, which is going to be for physical damage plus speed. This one has a 10% chance to restore 1 soul after using it. It's a minor thing, it's a 10% chance, it's a pretty low chance, but if you want to have that extra chance of gaining souls, then you can use this one. You could also go with crit on this one to ensure those crits land, since it is an AoE. Higher crit rate, or at least decent crit rate with this, ensures that at least one of the attacks will land as a crit, which would mean that the passive would then trigger the special skill to land it on a random enemy also. So this is not a bad option to do, to use orange, orange, orange on this one and just forget about the soul effect, so that way you can have that high crit rate instead with her. As far as stats or something that you would want to go for on her, for Dimension Slate or gear, you're going to want to focus on anything that gives her some type of survival. HP isn't bad, but she is going to be a DPS, and that's going to be the primary use for her, so you want to give her as much attack as possible. So try to get her as high of attack as possible through subs. You want to get her a really good crit rate so that she can proc into those special skills from the passive more often. So whatever crit rate you can give her. Crit power is also a good additional thing to give her, so that when she does crit, that she is going to be doing some extra damage. Accuracy isn't as important on her as it is for some others, because she gains accuracy based on the enemy evasion anyway. So if the enemy only has 5% evasion, she still gains 10% per 1% that they have. So if they have 5% evasion, she still has 50% accuracy. So her accuracy is going to be really high against a target anyway. So you don't need the accuracy to land the bleeds or anything on her. So it's not something you necessarily need to focus on with her to make sure you land those bleeds, since it's based off the other enemy's evasion too through her passive. That makes her pretty nice in that respect. You don't have to build accuracy into her or try to get it. I would try to focus more on the crit rate and attack with her. If you get a little bit of PDEF and MDEF and subs, that's fine. It's pretty low as it is, so I wouldn't focus too much on it, because even if you get, a decent amount on subs, it's still just going to be low no matter what. So I would try to focus more on making her like a glass cannon, just to try to get as much damage output from her as I can. Running her back row, try to protect her in some way. That's probably what you're going to be going for with her. HP, her HP is decent at 34k. It's not amazing or anything, so if you can get some HP substats from Dimension Slate or from gear, then do it. But definitely I would go with for the gear, just attack on both the primary and the offhand weapon slats. Something else with her, as far as gear sets go, the DPS set is quite nice because it does provide her with additional attack. So if you don't have access to the low 80 or 85 DPS sets, then going with a Great Spirit set for the additional turn. If you do that one would be pretty good to do with her. Or even the Baron J set. A full Baron J set wouldn't be too bad for her, just because of the increased damage that it does. But the Great Spirit set would probably be a better option for her, just for that additional turn chance, the higher speed, just so she can cycle into those turns more often. Anyway, overall, Michelle isn't too bad of an epic grade DPS. She does have some good. She does do a lot of damage through the bleeding effects. So it's really nice having her passive give her that accuracy where you don't have to build it into her. That way you can focus on other stats with her, especially like accuracy or speed or crit, those type of things. So she does have potential to do some pretty high damage. Her multipliers on her skills are pretty good. That passive skill that lets her attack a second time with her special skill with no soul cost is really nice, because that stacks up those bleeding effects really quickly on a target. So it's really good for taking down enemies, especially high HP type things. So the bleed effect is a nice soul damage effect that you can do to things. So she isn't too bad in those regards. So you do want to be careful using her if you're fighting against like an Artemiel, because as she attacks, she's going to get revenged against, and with her low PDEF stat, she's going to take a lot of damage from an Artemiel. So something to keep in mind if you're fighting one with her. Anyway, that's going to be it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thank you.